It was almost 12 months to the day of my accident when I stood out of that got out of that wheelchair, and I have not sat back in that wheelchair since. Thank you. That was such a great day, and it was such a huge achievement for me. But what I didn't realize was there was another challenge, even greater challenge for me about to come. Because for that whole 12 months, all I'd done is work so hard on the physical me, working hard to get back up and walking. I also believed that despite the fact that I was working hard to get back on my feet, I really believed that one day I was going to wake up and it was all just going to be a nightmare and I'd be back to normal. I was standing in my kitchen one day washing the dishes, and then it all of a sudden hit me that I was going to be paraplegic for the rest of my life, and that I was going to have to live in this body for the rest of my life. And I just fell apart. And that day is still a little bit of a blur. But I ended up on the floor of my kitchen, just curled up in the fetal position, and I was sobbing and sobbing for hours. And at one point, and I was on my knees, and at one point I went to the drawer of the kitchen and I pulled out a knife. I made the decision that if I was to live in this body, if I was going to be a paraplegic for the rest of my life, then it was too hard and I didn't want to do it. I just didn't want to live like that. I decided that I was going to take my own life right there, right on that moment. And I took the knife and I put it to my wrist, and I was almost euphoric. It was almost like I was about to be released from this prison of a body that I had been living in for the last 12 months. And I put the blade to my wrist and I looked down. And as I looked there, I realized something. This was really going to hurt. That was the answer. I didn't do it. It's not really all that involved, but it was because it was going to hurt and I didn't do it. I also realized at that point that I needed help, that I was slipping into a depression and I needed help. I couldn't do this on my own. So I rang a friend of mine. He's a psychiatrist. He's got the best name for a psychiatrist. It's Dr. Jolly. I rang Dr. Jolly. He wasn't in my immediate area, but he arranged for a colleague of his to come and see me straight away. And her name was Dr. Chaturvedi. She was a wonderful woman, and we worked very closely for about 9 months. And we had a lot of work to do because I was chronically depressed and I was doing depression better than anybody I know. She gave me a few tools that allowed me to move on, and she made me realize that I had to let go of the woman that I had been before I could go and discover the woman that I was going to be. She made me realize that I could have anything or be anything in life. I just had to make a decision as to what that was going to be, and it was that simple. She gave me 2 little distinctions that made a big difference, that really gave me that opportunity to move forward. And the first one was, I used to have this little voice in my head, and when things weren't going so well, this little voice used to say, "Why me?" Does anybody else have a voice that says that? Well, this little voice doesn't say, "Why me?" now. This little voice, when things aren't going so well or something happens that I'm not too happy about, this little voice now says, "What can I learn from this?" The other distinction that she made me see was that I can't possibly change everything that happens around me or that happens to me, but I can control what they mean to me. So instead of seeing my disability and the accident as being a tragedy and the end of my life, I saw it as a great opportunity to see how far I could go with whatever I had, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I don't have. What matters is what I do with what I do have. So with her help, I was able to make leaps and bounds. And now as I look back on all those dark days, I can't believe it, because my life is so full. I have an incredible life, one that I could never have imagined I'd have. Thank you. I still had a few challenges to go, however, and one of them was to overcome the fear of flying. As you could imagine, having been through something that you saw, I had developed a severe fear of flying. I was really trying so hard to overcome it, and I'd go flying in a light aircraft with some friends of mine, and as we were up there, I'd be praying to God, going, "Please get me down, and I promise I'll never, ever fly again." Well, I was about to give up. I was about to go and take up knitting or become a florist or something that would keep me on the ground when I met the most incredible woman. Her name was Lace Maxwell, and she was a wing walker. Now, for those who don't know what a wing walker is, she used to stand on the top wing of a tiger moth as it flew around the sky. And I loved Lace so much. She was so full of life, and she used to tell me about the wing walking, and she used to say, Allana, when you're up there, it's just like being a bird. The sky and the clouds are so close, you can almost touch them. She was saying this to me one day, and I said, Lace, I would love to do that one day. Have you ever said something you didn't quite mean? A couple of months later, Lace rang me and she said, I'm going to be doing the wing walk at an air show in a month. Would you like to come along? I hadn't actually seen her do the wing walk, so I said, yes, I'd love to. I got there and Lace was there, and in front of everybody, the crowd and everybody, Lace made this big announcement that Allana is going to do the wing walk. What? I knew nothing about it at all. And I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She had made all the arrangements. Over the next few hours, I sat thinking about my life, and I really didn't want to do this wing walk. You've got to remember that I was terrified of getting into an aeroplane, let alone standing on top of an aeroplane. But as I sat there contemplating, I also realized that if I was ever going to overcome this fear, it was going to take massive, massive action. This was going to be the ultimate get back on the horse. Is this a saying that you guys use? Get back on the horse? Yeah? A couple of people know it? Well, this was going to be the ultimate get back on the horse. And I decided that flying wasn't just something that I did, it was part of who I was. So I decided to go for it. And about 5 or 6 gentlemen helped lift me up onto the top wing of this tiger moth. And I was standing up there, looking down at all these people, thinking, oh shit, what on earth am I doing? What on earth am I doing up here? Well, Bob the pilot started the engine. A little louder. Isn't that cool? Started the engine and we started to rumble down the runway, and I was just terrified. My heart was going 1,000 miles an hour. I could feel the ground reverberating up through my legs. I'm thinking, I cannot believe I'm going to do this. You're an idiot, Allana. What are you doing? But it was too late because we were already on our way. We lined up down the runway, and Bob pushed in the power, and I felt myself pulling back, and I felt the ground, and there was so much wind, and there was so much noise, and we were heading down that runway, and I closed my eyes. I couldn't bear to look. There was so much happening and so much happening, and then he lifted us off the ground, and all of a sudden it was smooth, and I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't feel the ground. There was so much noise and so much wind. I daren't look up, and I was terrified, and I was terrified. My heart was going 1,000 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden I thought, I think I'm all right. I think I'm all right. I'll open my eyes. And as I opened my eyes, all I saw were the clouds and the sky. And it was just as Lace had said. It was just like being a bird. I could see the clouds, and they were so close I could almost touch them. I lifted my arms out like a bird, and I started laughing out loud, and I yelled out, look, Mum, I'm flying. I'm really flying. Thank you. Have you guys seen the movie Titanic? Yeah? You know the scene with Kate Winslet when she's up in the front of the ship? Yeah? That was me. I wasn't looking so glamorous though, because we were doing about 100 miles an hour and my eyelids were turning inside out. Do you want to see me do the wing walk? The actual wing walk? Yeah? Well, there's a few people. Yeah? A little more enthusiasm. All right, show them the wing walk. That's me doing the wing walk. That was just the most incredible day. And after that, there was not much I wasn't going to do. I was going to be able to fly. I was going to do anything. Nothing in the world was going to stop me from doing anything. And that day, I overcame my fear of flying. And I was ready to go and get my wings again. I had a few challenges because only a week after my accident, I'd received a letter from the Department of Aviation in Australia, and the letter said that I was to hand in my license until I could pass a full medical. So this was the first challenge that I had. So I went to the department and I had to jump through a lot of hoops and stamp my feet and yell at a lot of people, and they had never had anybody like me before. I was a test case. They kept telling me that I couldn't pass a medical, and I kept saying, well, why? And they didn't have an answer. So I said, well, you have no answer, well, I'm going to go and get my license. Eventually, after about 6 months, they agreed and they passed me fit to fly. I went out, thank you. I went back to fly airplanes, but I couldn't do that because of the paralysis in my legs, but I decided that it was time for me to fly helicopters. It had always been my dream, and it was the right time for me to do that. I went to a local school, and the instructor took me out onto the tarmac, and there was this tiny little helicopter sitting there. It was so tiny I thought it must have a remote control or something, because it certainly couldn't be for me. I said to him, you've got to be kidding. He said, no. This was my first lesson. This was the day I first started to fly helicopters. We went out and he showed me how to use all the controls, and they handed it over to me. And that day, I discovered a freedom that I could never have imagined. I flew that helicopter up, I flew that helicopter down, I flew that helicopter left, I flew that helicopter right. I went everywhere in that helicopter, and I was not restricted in any way. Not like I am restricted when I'm here on the ground. So I knew this was for me. I knew that the helicopters were going to be my ticket back into the air. Well, it took nearly 9 months, and then I became a commercial helicopter pilot. Thank you. I decided that I wanted a new challenge with my flying, so I decided to go and buy myself a little helicopter, and I decided that I wanted to fly right around the continent of Australia. Now, I was a bit nervous about this. I was worried about a few things. I was first of all worried that I might get lost, but I figured if I leave from Sydney, head north, keep Australia on my left and the water on my right, just keep going, then I'll make my way back. That was a good strategy. The other thing I was really concerned about was the fact that I was going to be landing and camping in areas up in the north of Australia. And for those of you who don't know, we have these things called crocodiles. I was terrified. I was so convinced that I was going to be taken by a crocodile while I was sitting in my tent. And somebody said to me that make sure you land on top of waterfalls because they can't climb up. So I thought that's a good strategy too. So I took off in my helicopter from Sydney, and I headed up north past some of the most incredible pristine beaches in the whole world. And I kept going, and I made it to the north of Australia, and I landed on my waterfalls. And I kept going, and I made it all the way around, and it took me 6 weeks and 4 days. I spent 165 hours in the air, and I travelled for 21,000 kilometres, and I made it back to Sydney. Thank you. It was a really interesting trip because the media got very interested in it, and I got a lot of news coverage. In fact, the media was there, as you can see, when I got back. And I got on the news that night, and I was pretty excited. So I went along with some friends to celebrate in a hotel, and I was there with him, and this man came along, and he said, "Aren't you the helicopter girl?" I said, "Oh, I don't know about that," but he says, "Have you just flown a helicopter around Australia?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I have to tell you a story." He said, "I'm a clinical psychiatrist, and I have a patient who I went to see today. She's been bedridden for a long time, suffering from chronic pain. But," he said, "when I got there today, she was sitting up in bed as bright as a button, and she couldn't wait to tell me how she'd got out of bed that day, and she went and put the washing on the line." And he said, "When I asked her why she did that, she said to me, 'I saw this lady on the news, and she was in a terrible plane crash, and she became paraplegic. But despite all her problems, she's just flown a helicopter around Australia. Now, if that lady can do that with all her problems, the least I can do is have a go and at least put the washing out.'" It's such a simple story, I know, but it impacted me so much, and I realized right at that point that by showing people what I can do or what I'm doing, I can help. I can help people to tackle their own challenges. Because let's face it, we all have our plane crash. It doesn't have to be that dramatic, but life in general can just be so tough. But if I can inspire people, if I can show people what I'm doing, maybe I can help them too. I realized that I wanted to reach as many people as I could, so I decided that I was going to write a book. I was going to write my life story. I went along to one of the largest publishing houses in Australia, Pan Macmillan, and I walked in and I told them about this wonderful story that I wanted to write. And I was in the boardroom with all their top executives, and one lady piped up and says, "Have you ever written anything before?" I said, "Oh, yes. I've never written a thing." They offered me a contract that very day, and they paid me to write this book. I could not believe it. I went away, and it took me about 5 months, and I called it, as you can see, The Best I Can Be. And I'm so, so proud of this book. It's incredible. It has been out for a couple of years in Australia. But I believed that it would reach the people who needed it most, and I have received just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters from incredible people whom I've been able to help. In my own home of Hobart, about 18 months ago, I got a phone call from a lady, and she had a little girl who was 5 at the time. This little girl, 2 years earlier, so when the little girl was 3, had been in an accident and she'd broken her back. And this lady described her paralysis, and we were almost identical. But this lady said, "I don't know what to do because we haven't any help, and I know that she can one day walk, but we don't know where to turn. We don't know what to do. Will you help us?" So I agreed to meet with her daughter, and when I got there, her mother just burst into tears, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I see my daughter in 30 years in your eyes." This little girl was 5. She'd been a paraplegic for 2 years. She didn't want to use her wheelchair. She couldn't walk, so she decided that she was going to crawl. And she'd been doing it for so long, she was so deformed, she couldn't get past this position because she was in the bent over position. And her knees were so deformed and calloused from her crawling. I agreed to work with her every Monday, and I have been doing so for the last 18 months. And we now have races up and down the hall, and she's walking. Thank you. If I wrote my book just to help that one little girl, then it's been worth it. One of the things that the book has offered me has been the opportunity to speak in public like I'm doing today. And when I realized that this was going to be something I was required to do, I was horrified, because standing in front of the public and speaking was one of my greatest fears. Can anybody else relate to that? Yes, I'm sure half the room. I was so worried about this because I had so much to say, but whenever I stood up to speak in public, I'd get this lump in my throat and nothing would come out, and I'd get this knot in my stomach and I couldn't even breathe. I was at a Tony Robbins seminar. Has anybody else seen Tony Robbins? Yeah? I believe he's coming here. If you get the chance, you cannot afford to miss seeing Tony. He changed my life. Well, actually, no, he didn't change my life, but he showed me how to change my own life. Well, I was at the Tony Robbins seminar, and I made the commitment that I was going to overcome my fear of public speaking right there on that weekend. I didn't know how, but I was going to do it. I bought the cheapest ticket, and I was in the back row, the very, very back row. And from where I was sitting, Tony Robbins was about this big. Tony's a giant. So I didn't even think that he could see me from where he was. As the seminar was going along, Tony asked the question, has anybody experienced something in their life that changed them forever? And I thought, well, I have. 4,500 people put their hands up and said, pick me, pick me. So I'm standing in the back row, and I tentatively put my hand up. And Tony pointed straight to me and he said, the girl in the back row. I stood up, I was horrified. I had a lump in my throat. I couldn't speak. I had a knot in my stomach. I couldn't breathe. I don't know what I said. I don't think I said anything. And then Tony started asking me stupid questions that had no relevance whatsoever. For those who've seen Tony, he was doing a pattern interrupt. And I said, "What?" And then we got chatting about something that had nothing to do with what I wanted to talk about. And at the end, I sat down and I sort of went, well, I'm intact. That wasn't so hard. I'd spoken in front of 5,500 people. And that day, I overcame my fear of public speaking. And I've been a professional speaker now for 3 years. Thank you. I love my speaking. I love to communicate with people, and I love to connect with people just like this. I love my writing and I love my speaking, but it'll always come second to my passion to fly. A couple of years ago, I decided that I was going to learn how to fly the big helicopters. I wanted to go and get my turbine endorsement. Now, a few people in the industry weren't terribly excited about that. I'm certainly in a very male-dominated industry, but a lot of people were concerned. Here I am, a female, have a disability, and I'm blonde. I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. Well, I had trouble finding somebody who would take me on and train me to that level. But I was finally introduced to a young pilot who I was told was a bit of a guru. He'd flown everywhere and everything. Well, I didn't know much about him, but he agreed to train me, so it couldn't have been that bad. We went out on our first flight, and we'd been in the air for about half an hour, and all my instructors up until this time had been really nice to me, really encouraging. But this guy suddenly turned to me and he swore at me. And it got worse. He yelled at me and he continued yelling at me. And the lesson was horrible, and I was so upset. When we came into Allana, I landed at the airport and I was just feeling so inadequate. He got out of the helicopter and he stood next to the helicopter and he put his hands on his hips and he said, "Get out of my helicopter, you fly like a girl." Well, he was probably right. But he trained me. We had a lot of things to overcome. But he hung in there, and after some months I finally got my turbine endorsement and started flying big helicopters. The story gets really soppy from here, because the grumpy instructor and I continued to work together, and we started getting on. He actually stopped getting so grumpy, and we just got engaged. I'd like you to meet my grumpy instructor fiance, Mr. Roger Corbin. Roger has had the most incredible career in aviation. He's been in 3 helicopter crashes. He tells me he's trying to get it right. He'll explain that to me one day. Roger and I have both experienced being injured and being in a wreck, being rescued by a helicopter. Incredibly, one of the accidents, he was flying a rescue helicopter himself. I believe it's fate that have brought us together. A couple of years ago, or some years ago, Roger said to me, "Lani," that's what he calls me, he said, "Lani, I have a dream that one day I want to run my own rescue helicopter service in Australia somewhere. Will you help me?" I said, "Of course." Our dream came true 2 years ago, and we now run the rescue helicopter service for the island of Tasmania. It's a lovely end to the Allana Arnott story, soon to be Allana Corbin story. Before I finish, I just want to make mention that I will be here after to sign books, and I'd love to meet as many of you as I possibly can. So please, if you would like to buy a book and sign it, I'd love to sign it for you. I'll be right here on the steps, and please come and see me. Even if you just want to come and share, please do so. So, the end of the Allana Arnott story. Almost 12 years ago, I nearly lost my life. And I had so many regrets at how I'd lived my 23 years. But I was given a second chance. And that was the greatest gift. That was the greatest gift I could ever been given. And now I've turned my whole life around. And because of what has happened to me, I'm now able to help save other lives in our island of Tasmania. I'm able to go and motivate people just like yourselves to be the best that you can be. Roger and I fundraise for kids who have disabilities so that we can buy them equipment so they can be the best that they can be too. I just look at these things and I realise now that if I was to face the end of my life today, that I would have no regrets, because I know that I have made a difference to some people, and that makes me feel pretty damn good. I want to ask you to take the time to continue to learn and to continue to grow. I'm just a normal person, but I'm the product of people like Tony Robbins and like all the speakers that you've heard today. I've taken the time to implement the things they've taught me. Please also take the time to look at your own life and ask the question, what do I want my life to be about? But most important, if you have a dream, don't you ever, ever let anyone tell you you can't. They told me I could never walk. They told me I would never walk. Let me do that again. They told me I would never walk. They told me I would never fly again, and I'm a commercial helicopter pilot. You can make any of your dreams come true. I did, and I know you can too. So go out there and spread your wings and fly as high as you possibly can.
I believe I can fly.